This is ANAplus, powered by the African News Agency. My name is Lance Witten. You're watching Newsbite, where we give you everything you need to know about Africa now. Fresh off commissioning a 45-megawatt solar plant in its Hardap region, Namibia has announced it's planning to spend some $63.9 million on a new 50-megawatt solar power plant, the construction of which would start in 2020. This is all part of Namibia's plan to reduce its reliance on hydroelectric power, but it also plans to cut its dependency on electricity generation in other countries. Namibia imports power from neighbors South Africa, which has electricity supply problems of its own, Zambia and Zimbabwe. Of course, this is unsustainable, so the government is forging ahead with its own generation plans. The encouraging thing, of course, is that it's going green, increasing its spend on renewable energy. Africa has some of the best sun in the world, and the sunlight that falls on this beautiful continent is ideal for energy generation. Some countries are already capitalizing on this. South Africa has some of the best irradiation levels, that's quality sunlight capable of producing power, in the world. The country is churning out 1,979 megawatts cumulatively from solar power alone, and a further 2,094 megawatts from wind power. Morocco is aiming to produce 42% of its power from solar by 2020. It's an ambitious goal, but when you consider that its Noor Ouarzazate concentrated solar power complex is among the biggest in the world, it's not that far-fetched. Situated on the edge of the Sahara Desert, Morocco is perfectly positioned to make use of solar energy, and they've done it in a novel way. There are two ways to generate electricity using the sun: photovoltaic and concentrated solar power. Photovoltaic cells convert sunlight directly into energy, whereas concentrated solar power focuses the sunlight via mirrors and other tools into a concentrated beam, which in most cases is then used to drive a heat engine. And more about that a little bit later on. Morocco's plant uses the concentrated beam, which reaches 500 degrees Celsius, to melt salt, which stays hot enough at night to deliver power for 3 hours. The plant itself is huge. It's roughly the size of Manhattan at around 3,000 hectares. It generates 580 megawatts, enough electricity to power a city the size of Prague, which has a little more than 1.3 million residents. Morocco currently generates 35% of its energy needs through renewable means. Elsewhere on the continent, there are also strides being made. In Rwanda, Ghana is building a 155-megawatt plant. Kenya's 54.6 megawatt Garissa plant went live in November 2018, and Algeria has plans to generate 12 gigawatts within the next 11 years. So how does it work? Well, let's talk about photovoltaics, or PV, first. PV utilizes photovoltaic cells, which simply convert sunlight into energy via the photovoltaic effect. This is a physical and chemical phenomenon seen in some elements. The problem here is scalability. It takes up a lot of space and requires a lot of sunlight. But there's a settlement in Germany that's completely off the grid, being powered by rooftop solar panels, and they get half the sunshine annually of Kenya. Now, PV panels used to be expensive, but the costs are coming down internationally as technology advances. The storage of that energy also used to be a problem cost-wise, but those costs are also coming down. Now, these panels can either be mounted to be static, or they could have sunlight trackers to maximize the exposure to the sun. Now, let's talk about concentrated solar power, or CSP. With CSP, a system of mirrors is aimed at maximizing the irradiation by concentrating all the gathered sunshine on one point, such as a solar tower. Think of it as using a magnifying glass to start a fire. You're magnifying and concentrating the sunlight to heat a tower. Now, this heat is used either to drive a heat engine, which will use the heat to generate electricity, or the heat could be used to drive a thermochemical reaction, with electricity generation being among the effects of that reaction. Now, these plants are usually built in a circle or arc formation. In Morocco's case, the plant uses a combination of CSP and PV. While these plants have the potential to produce massive amounts of energy, one of the downsides is that it requires direct, uninterrupted sunlight, like your magnifying glass. So any cloud cover or shade of any kind would hamper your generation capabilities. On the other hand, PV can also use diffuse radiation, so it doesn't necessarily require a clear day. The problem with PV is that it can only generate power during the day, so it's not very effective after the sun goes down, which is usually when the demand for electricity goes up. CSP, though, because it can use thermal energy storage, like storing the heat in molten salt, like they do in Morocco, so it can keep generating electricity in the dark. I hope now you've got a better understanding of solar power and how Africa is innovating in this space. This is Newsbite on ANAplus. We make Africa matter.